If everyone will come on in and take a seat, we'll begin our services. If you will, open your song book to number 274. 274. Brother Joe is going to lead us in this song. And then after that, Brother Willard Dunlap will lead us in our prayer, and then we'll begin our class.
Verses 1 and 3. I have found a friend in Jesus, he's everything to me. He's the fairest of 10,000 to my soul. The lily of the valley, and the one I see. All I need to cleanse and make me fully whole. In sorrow he's my comfort, in trouble he's my stay. He tells me every care on him to roll. He's the lily of the valley, the bright and morning star. He's the fairest of 10,000 to my soul. He will never, never leave me, nor yet forsake me here, while I live by faith and do his blessed will. All about me, I've nothing now to fear. With his hand my hungry soul shall fill. Then sweeping up to glory, to see his blessed face, where rivers of delight shall ever roll. He's the lily of the valley, the bright and morning star. He's the fairest of 10,000 to my soul.
Our Almighty and all-loving Heavenly Father, we're thankful, Father, for this Lord's Day. We're thankful that we can continue our worship service today is to study that Word and to grow as Christians should. Heavenly Father, we pray that you'll be with all of those that have been mentioned on our prayer list that are sick and unable to be with us. Be with those, Father, and watch over them. Take care of them. Heavenly Father, bless this congregation, bless each one of us. Forgive us of our sins, for we ask it all in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. If you will, go ahead and turn your Bibles to the book of Proverbs, to chapter 16. We're going to begin at verse 27. Chapter 16, verse 27. I've had several people make comments in the class that they appreciate the study of the book of Proverbs. And what I'd like to encourage you to do, if you see something in this, feel free to get my attention. You can raise your hand or you can speak up. But I encourage you to participate as we go through this section. There's a lot in this portion of Scripture. Chapter 15 focused on the use of the tongue. Chapter 16 focuses on God's sovereignty. We'll see that. But also brings in the role of kings and the role of the tongue as well. So let's begin now as we start with chapter 16 and verse 27. An ungodly man digs up evil, and it's on his lips like a burning fire. Now think about that for just a minute. An ungodly man does what? Digs up evil. What does that mean? Stirs up trouble, but what about that word right there?
He works hard to find it.
Okay, he's looking for it. He's digging. He's like a person who's in search of some buried treasure. Okay, is it not here? Okay, I'll go find. Have you ever met somebody who was constantly saying, have you heard any news lately? Have you got any juicy gossip going on? You know, they're looking for something that is evil so that they can do what with it? Spread it, because it says it's on his lips like a burning fire. Now, the other day I fixed some chili since it's gotten cold weather. And you know what I usually do when I fix a pot of chili? I've got to test it. And you know what the first thing you do is put it in your mouth, and then you go, and then you spit it out. You know why, don't you? Too hot. It's got to get out of there. Some people are trying to dig up evil. They're trying to dig up what's going on with people's lives. And then once they hear it, oh, I got to go tell somebody. I got to get this out. I can't hold it back. Let me offer you some interesting passages here. The word ungodly here is a special word. Remember in the New Testament, he says, what concord has Christ with Belial or Belial, depending on how you pronounce it? That's a Hebrew word which means worthless. And it's found several times in the Bible. One of the places is chapter 6 and verses 12 through 15, where he says, a worthless person, a wicked man, walks with a perverse mouth. He winks with his eyes, he shuffles with his feet, he points with his fingers. Perversity is in his heart. He devises evil continually. He sows discord. Therefore calamity shall come upon him suddenly, and suddenly he shall be broken and without remedy. Calls him a worthless person. A worthless person. Someone who has no real good value. I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be the person that doesn't help but actually detracts and makes things worse. Well, that's what Solomon is talking about here when he talks about a man who is ungodly. Well, let me go ahead and put verse 28 with that. A perverse man sows strife, and a whisper separates the best of friends. Now, how do verses 27 and 28 go together? Well, let's go back to verse 27. An ungodly man digs up evil. He's looking for something. And then it says it's like burning fire on his lips. A perverse man sows strife, and a whisper separates the best of friends. This man here sows strife, and he separates friends. If I'm out here and I'm listening for something bad on somebody, will you hear something bad on somebody if you're looking for it?
If you don't hear it, you'll make it sound like that's what it was.
Even if it's just a germ of something, you're going to try to add something to it to make it sound, embellish it just a little bit, to make it sound a little more devious, because you're a wicked man after all if you're doing that. Adding a little bit to it, making it a little more devious, that's no problem. But he says what that man does is to sow strife. He creates conflict between folks. And he separates the best of friends. People who have once been close in life, they say, well, did you hear what they said about you? No, what did they say? Well, I don't know if it was exactly like this, but here's sort of what it went like. And then you hear that and you think, well, I thought they were my friend. They're being two-faced. I guess I won't mess with them anymore. I'm not going to talk with them anymore. Create strife. The person who does that is a perverse, they're warped. A warped person who will not do anything of benefit or of value for someone else.
1 Peter 4:8 says love covers a multitude of sins. So that would be someone who doesn't love.
There's no love there. Well, there's several verses. I started to go ahead, but my problem, I told Joe before class this morning, I said, since I'm not on the quarter system anymore, I'm just getting to teach. I said, I can go as fast or slow as I want. But the problem is, if I go too slow, and I start next week before where I started this week, that becomes a problem. So I'm trying not to go too slow, but there are several verses that go along with this. Well, let's go to verses 29 and 30 because he's going to even move a little bit more this direction. A violent man entices his neighbor and leads him in a way that is not good. He winks with his eyes to devise perverse things. He purses his lips and brings about evil. Now let's go back here and notice. He said you have a violent man. And it says he does what to his neighbor? What's that word? Entices. What does the word entice mean? Lures him. You know, here's a man who's trying to provoke. That's what I think. You know, if someone's trying to bait you into a fight, in Alabama would say they're trying to egg you on. Well, actually, they'd say ag you on, but the idea is to draw you into a conflict. Do violent people like conflicts? Yes, they do. You know, they're just spoiling for a fight. They're wanting one. He entices his neighbor, and it says he leads him. Well, that entices up there and leads him goes together. But it's in a way that's not good. Has anybody ever talked you into doing something which you knew better, but you just listened and you got involved, and next thing you know, you're in cahoots with them? That's another word from. Y'all didn't know all the language that you were going to learn in the class. You're in league with them, and you're working along beside of them. But then you get to verse 30. Notice the way he does things. He winks his eye to devise perverse things. You know, he's signaling with some facial gestures. If you're telling a big yarn and your friend over here is believing it, and another one of your friends is standing over there watching you, and you wink at him and you say, yeah, well, I got him, you know. He swallowed this hook, line, and sinker. But then it says he purses his lips. Now, what does that mean? Okay. What do you ladies do when you close your purse? You're bringing them together. Yeah. The best... I was going to say, that's one just leave alone. The idea is a person brings their lips together, and it says he brings about evil. Can facial gestures signal to somebody that you want to fight? Can they signal to somebody you're tricking someone else? Yes, they can. What the picture he is trying to give us here, and again, I go back to chapter 6, verses 12 through 15, where it says he shuffles, winks with his eyes, shuffles with his feet, points with his fingers. He's doing all these gestures to try to distract you from what he's really doing. There is, in a real sense, like the sleight of hand. Those people who are illusionists, they call themselves magicians today, a lot of what they do is to distract you with one thing in order to get you to miss something else. And you know, they're working something with their hand and something else is going on over here. And what he's trying to say is this man here who's violent, and so if you start putting all of this together, you start seeing a big picture of the person that he is describing here and how he works against God. Now let's go on to verse 31. Changes the subject. The silver-haired head is a crown of glory if it is found in the way of righteousness. Now, generally speaking, what do we expect from people whose hair is silver or white? They're generally going to be older, and we generally expect wisdom from them. If you go to chapter 20, and you go to verse 29, it says, "The glory of young men is their strength, and the splendor of old men is their gray head." Now, when you're young, what is it that you think distinguishes you? Your strength. Look what you can pick up. Look what you can do. When you get old, what is it that you're proud of? Not just gray head. The knowledge, the wisdom, because it becomes synonymous with it. In Leviticus 19 and verse 32, it says, "You shall rise before the gray-headed man and honor the presence of an old man and fear the Lord your God. I am the Lord." He's trying to say you ought to respect the person who has that knowledge, that wisdom, who's attained to that gray hair. In the book of Job, and you go to chapter 32 and look at verses 6 and 7. "So Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite, answered and said, I am young in years, and you are very old. Therefore I was afraid and dared not declare my opinion to you, and said, Age should speak, and multitude of years should teach wisdom." That's interesting. Here's a younger man who says, you know what? I ought to be quiet until I listen to someone who has years of experience, years of knowledge, speaks, and then I can say what I might need to say. Any of you ever been, when you were younger in life, just were itching to say something, and then nobody gave you an opportunity to say it, and then you were glad they didn't? I can identify with that perfectly. You know, you want to say something. Had you said something, you would put your foot in your mouth. Best thing to do is when you know there's more wise people in front of you, let them speak. And that's what Elihu was trying to do. But then notice the last phrase of this. The silver-haired head is a crown of glory if. That's a big if. If it is found in the way of righteousness. Is it possible to be an old fool? Absolutely it is. So what he's telling us is that the gray-haired man, that's a crown of glory. If it's found in the way of righteousness. If not, it's not a way of righteousness. It's not something worthy to be proud of. Verse 32. He who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city. Now, self-control is a very important theme for Solomon. Let me just add some verses here for your cross-reference. Chapter 14 and verse 17 and verse 29. He says, "A quick-tempered man acts foolishly. A man of wicked intentions is hated." Verse 29. "He who is slow to wrath has great understanding, but he who is impulsive exalts folly." And then chapter 25 and verse 28. "Whoever has no rule over his own spirit is like a city broken down without walls." And then one more, chapter 29 and verse 11. He said, "A fool vents all of his feelings, but a wise man holds them back." There are several other passages that could go along with this, but a man who's slow to anger, what does that involve, being slow to anger?
Takes a lot to make them mad.
Takes a lot to make them mad. But it's not just being dispassionate. You know, there's some people who just don't care anymore. You can't make them mad because they don't care. But a man who is slow to anger is a man who is able to control his passion, his desires, his feelings. Remember what James chapter 1 tells us? Let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. And then he goes on to say, for the wrath of man does not work the righteousness of God. Slow to anger is better than the mighty. Now, any fool can just start a brawl, can start a fight. The man who can stand back and not engage in a battle, not engage in a war, is a man who shows he's got a whole lot more restraint. And then he said, he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city. So many times you see people who just let their anger vent. You see them just do whatever comes to the top of their head, whatever they feel like doing. That's not a person who has got control of themselves. He's not that powerful. The powerful man's the one who's able to hold his tongue and hold his anger. And that's what Solomon was trying to stress upon him. Now the last verse of the chapter. The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. Now this is an interesting study. We start talking about lots. What do you mean, lot? What is a lot? Okay. It's something of chance. Something that would be random. A lot of times when it comes time to do something, you say, okay, let's draw straws. Somebody who gets a short straw has to do it. Or we may say, let's flip a coin. Heads, I have to do it. Tails, you have to do it. You know, you have a choice that's of randomness. And you can see that used in the Bible. Let's go back to chapter 18 and look, or not back to, forward to chapter 18 and look at verse 18. He says, the casting of lots causes contentions to cease and keeps the mighty apart. Now I'm starting seeing how that might tie to what the verse said before and talking about the violent man earlier. Here's a person that you're going to try to avoid conflict, and someone says, okay, I think I ought to get it. You think you ought to get it. Well, how are we going to resolve that? Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll flip a coin. And whoever chooses it, gets it, and we're just going to agree. That usually does resolve things, doesn't it? There's one piece of fried chicken left on the table after Thanksgiving meal. And you say, I want it. Another person says, I want it. Right. Let's flip my two-headed coin. You know what I'm talking about. It resolves the conflict without it being a difficulty. Well, let's also take with it Acts chapter 1 and verse 16. Now, when you had Judas, you had 12 apostles. Judas hanged himself. And the scriptures they interpreted to mean that someone would take Judas's place. They had two men who were very capable of doing the job. They met all the qualifications. And it says they cast their lots, and their lot fell on Matthias, and he was numbered with the 11 apostles. Now, that brings into the discussion what we have in the latter part of here in chapter 16, verse 33. He says, but its every decision is from the Lord. Did the Lord, was he involved in the choice of Matthias as the next apostle? Even though it was random from the other 11's perspective, it was God's choice in the casting of those lots. Now, let's go to Leviticus, to chapter 16 and verse 8. It says, their inheritance was by lot, as the Lord had commanded by the hand of Moses, for the 9 tribes and the half tribe. It says their inheritance was by lot. You know, I've thought about, you go back to Abraham and Lot, capital L. And they were dwelling in the southern part of what is Israel today. And it says that there was strife that had come to pass between their herdsmen. And Abraham's response was, you know, let there be no strife between me and you, between our herdsmen. He said, for we are brethren. We ought to be able to work together. Abraham gave Lot first choice. Lot chose the well-watered plains and ended up pitching his tent towards Sodom. Not a good decision. But what happens if you go into a land and everybody says, okay, who gets this, who gets that? Did everybody get to, well, I want this. Well, no, I wanted that. How, you know, that sounds like kids after someone's passed and you're trying to divide up the inheritance. Well, I wanted that. How can you resolve those kinds of conflicts? Cast lots, you know. And in doing so, God's will took place, but it was from the perspective of them random. And then you go to Joshua chapter 14 and verse 2. And that's where that was at. Actually, Leviticus says Aaron cast lots for the 2 goats. That was in Leviticus. I read the wrong verse there. And for the casting of the lots for the scapegoat. In all of this, you see the fact that the casting of lots was for the purpose of trying to make a decision. But I would indicate it's not only for the purpose of trying to make a decision, it's for the purpose of trying to avoid conflict. And occasionally, maybe we would be better off if rather than arguing about something, everybody says, okay, stop. If 2 of us want something, let's find an impartial way so that it can be divided so that there will be no conflict. Y'all think that's wise? Absolutely it is. And the Lord inspired Solomon to put that there. Okay, let's go to chapter 17 now. Chapter 17 is very similar, but it does have some unique verses within it. Better is a dry morsel with quietness than a house full of feasting with strife. Now, this is another one of the many times that Solomon uses the term better. And I discussed this a little bit last week about you've got 2 different choices. And one choice is better than another. I thought about trying to illustrate that with Mary and Martha in Luke chapter 10. Jesus came to their house, and it says Martha was distracted with much serving. And Mary was sat at the Lord's feet and heard his words. Martha came to Jesus and said, Lord, my sister has left me to serve alone. Tell her to help me. And you remember the Lord's response. Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. One thing is needful, and Mary has chosen the good part, which shall not be taken from her. You got choices. Mary made the better choice. But I thought we needed to have everything all just perfectly lined up, and we had to have the Norman Rockwell feast on the table. You've seen the picture. Well, the question is, what's more valuable? A dry morsel with quietness, than a house full of feasting with strife. What is a dry morsel? A cracker, you know. Something dry. He said, that indicates you don't have a whole lot. You're eating what's left over with quietness. And the word quietness there is not everybody won't talk, but it's the absence of conflict. Than a house full of feasting. You've got a lot of people there. The noise is loud, but it's strife that you're hearing. Have any of y'all ever gone to a family meal where there was squabbling going on? No, I know nobody. It's just my family that does that. No, I think what you find is that's very much a reality. And if you go to chapter 15 and verse 17, he says, better is a dinner of herbs where love is than the fatted calf with hatred. Same idea, just expressed in different terms. Or Ecclesiastes chapter 4 and verse 6. He says, better is a handful with quietness than 2 handfuls with toil and grasping after wind. There's some things that are better. And the next holiday that many of us will be enjoying together will be Thanksgiving. And you will have many of us, families getting together. What if you decided right now, I'm going to listen to what Solomon said, and we're going to choose a calmer, a quieter, a more peaceful meal. What would be more important, dragging out the good china or eating off of paper plates? Well, it just depends. Okay. I was thinking it depends on whether or not it can be done peacefully. You know, it may be that everybody wants to eat lunch off of Grandma's china and remember Grandma. But what you have to do is you have to look and see whether something promotes peace, harmony, quietness, or whether something's going to promote stress and difficulties. And now I begin to see what he has been saying at the end of chapter 16, just flowing right on with what's in chapter 17, talking about the violence, talking about the tongue, talking about all of this being slow to anger. This is really the way you get along in life. What Solomon is trying to tell us is how a person should live and get along with life. Okay, verse 2. A wise servant will rule over a son who causes shame, and will share an inheritance among the brothers. That's a real interesting verse here, because it talks about the difference of privilege. Now, in some circles, to talk about privilege today is a bad word. Are most of us privileged in some ways and not in others? Yeah. I've got some good friends who preach who were reared in orphan homes. One of them actually wrote a little thing this morning on Facebook about being raised in Tennessee Children's Home, which was once called Tennessee Orphans Home. And he's talking about when he was young, he was an angry young man. The fact that you were reared by 2 parents in a peaceful home, is that a privilege over somebody who didn't have it? If your family had more resources, financial resources, do you have a greater privilege maybe to go to school where you want to and have the ability to make more money than someone else did? Sure you do. The fact that you were reared by Christians, does that itself also become a privilege that others may not have had? Yes. In biblical times, you had the son and the servant. And the book of Hebrews makes a real interesting point about that in Hebrews chapter 3, talking about Moses and Jesus. Jesus was the son and Moses was a servant. The distinction being made there. The servant does not have the same authority nor prospect that the son does. But Solomon points out there's a situation where a wise servant, not just a servant, a wise servant will rule over a son. Now, it's a specific kind of son. It's a son who causes shame. Now, with that in mind, I think that you got to realize Solomon probably is being prophetic here about his son Rehoboam. If you go to 1 Kings chapter 11 and verse 28, it says, "This man Jeroboam was a mighty man of valor. And Solomon, seeing the young man was industrious, made him the officer over all the labor force in the house of Joseph." Now think about that for just a second. Solomon now is choosing one of the young men to be a ruler over all of these men here. His name is Jeroboam. Does that ring a bell? He is. This is the same Jeroboam that when Rehoboam, Solomon's son, chose to push the ideas of these young men to tax people to death, to make their lives miserable, they chose to follow Jeroboam. And so he says, a wise servant will rule over a son who causes shame. Is there a message in that? Absolutely there is. Because he says he will share an inheritance among the brothers. Of course, Jeroboam went on to be a very bad king himself. But he was a very industrious and a very talented young man who, had he kept his attitude right, could have been a great ruler himself. I would also suggest to you that there is in this a message about the prodigal son. When the prodigal son returned, what did he have? Had nothing. Do you remember what he said when he was in the far country and he was in want? He said, "My father's servants have bread enough and to spare." In other words, here I am a son, but I am in worse shape than my father's servants are. And when he returns, he has nothing. Because you remember when the elder brother complained how the father spoke to him, he said, "All that I have is yours." That didn't mean that the prodigal son who came back got to come back and get more. No, that's not it at all. But he came back as a son, but he came back as a son who had caused shame. Very powerful lesson within that, and to say that you might be a person of privilege, but you can abuse that privilege to the point where it actually ends up coming back negatively to you. Verse 3. "The refining pot is for silver, and the furnace for gold, but the Lord tests the hearts." Now, the refining pot and the furnace, there's a term for that. Do y'all know what it's called? Purifying. It's called a crucible. Okay. It's something that's used to test and to purify. The refining pot is a little different but the furnace for the gold, but the principle is the same. You heat them up with a very high heat, and the metals separate themselves to a point where you know what's gold and you know what's dross. And so you put them through that, and you find out what's good gold, what's good silver, and what's not. He says, the Lord tests the hearts. Now, silver is good, gold is good. The heart of man is good. And if I want to go to the New Testament, I can go to 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 7. And he says that the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold, that perishes though it is tested by fire, may be found unto the praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ. The testing of your faith. What does the Lord test within us? What does it mean to say that He tests the hearts? Where it's genuine or not. Can a person say that they love you and not really love you? Solomon will go on to say, he'll say eat and drink, but his heart is not with you. Talk about the king. There are people who will say things and they don't mean them. And then there are people who are at times weak and give in, but their heart is in the right place. I think about David. Did David make mistakes? Serious mistakes. Absolutely. But the Bible talks about him as a man after God's own heart. God can look down into the heart of each and every individual. I'm working on the second question for next Sunday night's lesson. And because of the answer to the question, I'm not going to mention the question now because I'll give away all my questions. But the heart of man, how do you know what's in somebody else's heart? 1 Corinthians chapter 2, part of that text that I was studying with you this morning. Who knows the things of a man save the spirit of man which is in him? Even so, no one knows the things of God except the Spirit of God. I think it's verse 11 of chapter 2, maybe earlier, but I think it's verse 11. But the thought of it is the heart of man. I don't know what's in your heart. You don't know what's in my heart. You can judge actions, and we have to judge actions, but we have to be careful we don't start looking and judging someone else's heart, because the Lord is the one who's able to judge the heart.
Well, Tony, that makes me think about Noah in his days, and that when God saw that it was no longer good for man to dwell because of the thoughts and intents of the heart. So that it's not necessarily the actions, not just the actions, but what thoughts led you to those actions, or that's where all things originate from, thoughts and intents.
Yeah. You remember when they were arguing with Jesus about eating with unwashed hands. And he said, it's not what goes in a man that defiles him, but what comes out. And he says, for out of the heart comes forth evil thoughts, murders, thefts. All these things proceed forth from inside and defile a man. But to eat with unwashed hands doesn't. The Lord was trying to point out that where the real source of the trouble is on the inside, as Brother Willie pointed out there. I'm going to take one more verse. We've got a couple of minutes left. An evildoer gives heed to false lips. A liar listens eagerly to a spiteful tongue. That really goes back to where we actually started our lesson this morning. And that is, how do you respond to gossip? How do you respond to an evil report? He said, an evildoer gives heed to false lips. He listens to a lie. Is that not what Eve did? Listen to a lie? Why do people listen to lies? Because they want to?
It sounds good to them because they're
1 Thessalonians chapter 1 and chapter 2, Paul's talking about this. He said they had pleasure in unrighteousness. They enjoyed doing wrong. A liar, notice now, a liar listens eagerly. Here's an evildoer, here's a liar. You have a liar listening to a liar. Well, that's when you really get it all messed up. How can you tell when anybody's telling the truth if a liar lies to a liar? But he listens eagerly to a spiteful tongue. It's because he likes what's being said. He likes the conflict. He likes to sow discord. And all of that being put together brings about the kind of strife and the kind of difficulty that people... There's a couple of verses here, and then they're going to ring the bell. I'll just go and tell you Exodus chapter 23 and verse 1, and then 1 Samuel chapter 24 and verse 9. And David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men who say, David seeks your harm?" Why are you listening to people not telling you the truth? We'll pick up with verse 5 next week.